Well, Stewart, welcome to the Basis Project. My name is Miles, and your name is...
Stewart Swerdlow.
And what brings you to the United Kingdom?
It was an airplane,
My
but
God.
I am here to do seminars and consultations and interviews.
Now, for those who don't know who you are, what's your basic background?
Well, in order...
Montauk Project, for instance.
Montauk Project, yes, exactly. But because I was in Montauk Project, I have to give a background of my family. My great-uncle Yakov Swerdlow was the first president of the Soviet Union. His son Alexei, who was my cousin, started KGB. My grandmother, Maya Swerdlow, was a Soviet spy during World War II. And another great uncle of mine, Benjamin Swerdlow, started mind control and programming in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. So in effect, it was one of the earliest mind control programs in the world. My grandfather, Mikhail Swerdlow, was sent to Great Britain to start the Communist Party here, and he arrived in Liverpool and did his work. And when he was successful, he was then sent to the United States to do the same thing there.
Now, what do you mean by mind control? There's an awful lot of technologies involved in that.
Yes, of course, in the old days, it involved drugs, chemistry, torture, that kind of thing. And that actually continued on until the 1960s and 70s. But once we get into the late 80s, early 90s, mind control was developed through satellite transmission so that you didn't have to be taken to a specific location to be programmed. You could be programmed eating lunch or sleeping or going about your daily business.
Similar to the film They Live.
Similar to that, yes.
So can you describe the techniques involved in these types of mind control?
Yes, and it was actually pre-Montauk project. Montauk was actually 1970 to 1983. But we have to thank the Germans during World War II for developing procedures that fractured the mind pattern of a human being through torture. They developed what is called psychic driving, where you bring a person to extremes, several hours or days of extreme cold and then extreme heat. You can give them starvation for several days, and you overfeed them, make them sleep for days, and then keep them awake. Fracture. The mind doesn't know what to expect. And then this was developed further by Dr. Ewan Cameron, who, after the war, brought the Nazi techniques to Canada, actually, in the late 1940s.
Who is this guy you just mentioned?
He's Dr. Ewan Cameron was a Scottish scientist who was very interested in this kind of work. And after the war, as people know now, in the US it was Project Paperclip, where they would bring valuable Nazi scientists, doctors, etc., to the United States, Canada, UK, even to the Soviet Union, where they would continue their experiments, and they were saved from the Nuremberg trials, etc. And Dr. Ewan Cameron got the German information, and he started clinics in Montreal, in Ottawa, and Toronto, and he enveloped or enhanced the psychic driving. He started out in mental institutions, where he would have the subjects in a room where they would have a split board between their eyes. One side would see a flower blooming, another side would see an animal being ripped apart. In one ear would be classical music, and another ear would be loud, horrendous music.
Was it important which side saw what scene?
They would switch sides so that the left brain, which is the ego, physical reality-based side, and the right brain, the creative, emotional, spiritual side, would then be confused as to what to accept, and the mind would then fracture. And that's when programming was initiated in the mind pattern. They knew through the German experimentation that the most you could fracture a mind would create a geometric shape in the mind of a cube of 13 by 13 by 13, and that would lead to 2,197 compartments that could be programmed into subpersonalities, full personalities, specific functions, constructs, etc.
Okay, we were talking about you were talking about the details of fracturing the mind. There are some MK Ultra style. Again, correct me if I'm wrong if I use a wrong phrase, where the in this country there's a great deal of child abuse involved, and there is a huge scandal involving children's homes, and the key of Solomon has been mentioned in terms of fracturing the child's mind using an energetic shock of the young child's energies into the psyche and breaking the mind that way. Is this something that you were involved with, or not involved with, but is this part of the techniques that were used? Because this is something which connects with the elite, the high families. Mm-hmm. But also, why do you need to fracture the mind? What is the reason? Why does it take so much effort? Why is there so much going into doing that?
Under so-called normal circumstances, the human mind is under operation of a core personality. And the core personality will function in an intact manner during daily life, etc. However, when trauma and extremes are introduced simultaneously, the mind cannot handle the overload of input, and so it starts to dissociate. In fact, very often the personality will actually leave the body to a degree, so that it doesn't have to experience the pain and trauma that is being inflicted upon it. And so the mind then starts to compartmentalize, so that a portion of the mind will handle what's being done, while another portion of the mind is distracting the consciousness or the personality from the trauma. And if this is done repetitively, then both the distraction and the awareness start to fracture because they can't handle the overload.
Are there specific advantages in different techniques for different outcomes?
The techniques that have been used actually for many thousands of years have been, of course, through narcotics, through pain and torture, but it's also understood that human sexual energy is one of the most powerful energies that exists. And so if they use that as the manner of torture and pain, then the mind opens up in incredible ways.
What do you mean by incredible?
Well, for example, the process of orgasmic release, the mind opens up. It is orgasmic energy is actually the replication of when the God mind released to create all of reality. So that's why humans are compelled to replicate this over and over again. It's a replication of the God mind creation energy.
So by gaining access to that, are you saying that we could then engineer reality?
Correct. And I always use the analogy that thoughts are film, the brain is the projector, and physical reality is the screen. And so if you don't like the movie that's playing, you change the film, which is the way you think. However, the film can be replaced artificially through this programming process. And that's what the Illuminati powers that be do in order to download certain softwares into the mind so that certain functions via triggers are accessible.
Could you explain those terms?
Well, there is a difference between programming and mind control, and I know a lot of people use them synonymously. Programming is the actual software that's installed with the foundations of all the functions and alters. Mind control is the operation of that programming. And that is also different than brainwashing. Brainwashing happens every day. Your parents can brainwash you, school, politics, religion especially, and that's just telling you something over and over again till you believe it. But the programming and mind control is an embedded pattern that actually hooks onto your foundational mind patterns and is an overlay. And so you think that it's your own thought when actually it's been artificially introduced.
So what's the agenda behind those?
The agenda behind all of this is to create a society that is robotical, very similar to what you see on the Borg in Star Trek. You know, you report to a computer system, you don't question anything, you don't deviate from your functions, you do what you're told, and there is no independent thinking to do otherwise. The part that is important is that to the Illuminati this is a form of their society. This is their culture. And they do this to ensure that the culture does not deviate from its agenda through eons of time.
Many observers would say that normal humans have inventive creativity. They have art. They have a whole pile of new things in their minds. It would infer that by some other group of people demanding a hive mind or a Borg mind or a cyborg mind or something that is totally controlled, that they are maybe different to other people here.
You know, everybody has the same potential. And as far as a hive mind is concerned, yes, that is exactly what they would like. A ruler, the queen bee or whoever it happens to be, sends out or transmits a signal to the worker bees, the slaves, who carry out that signal or order. And that is what the Illuminati wish. Remember, we're on a planet of over 7.5 billion people. The Illuminati, Committee of 300, all the control systems, if you add them up, it's only a few 100,000 people. And that might sound like a lot, but in comparison to billions, it's minute. And so armies and weapons are not enough. The population could overwhelm that small minority. And so the most logical thing that they can do is mind control the population.
Okay, Stewart, you're talking about the intricacies of the many different types of mind control. What I want to look at is your role in this. And you mentioned the intelligence services and the Russians, but there's also a Prussian influence on our education to make all our children into very obedient people who don't have inventive creativity and imagination. Dangerous imagination, some commentators have described as. What ultimately is the purpose of all this, and where is it taking us?
Purpose of all of this mind control is to create a civilization that is obedient to the rules and regulations, that pays attention to the news media, the politicians, the religious leaders, and the school teachers, so that it's like Simon sees, Simon says, Simon does. And so when they say something, you do it, no questions asked, a complete and total obedience. And this will ensure the continuation of the society that they want. Now, the leaders of our world, and I know that will be strange to many people who aren't familiar with the information, have a descendancy from the reptilians who colonized Lemuria, then created the civilization in Sumeria, became the Chaldeans, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, and Khazars, and so on, until they went into Western Europe and everywhere else in the world. And they reported in those days to their reptilian leaders. However, since the last 100 or so years, there has been a decision within the leadership of the Illuminati to create their own empire with the Earth as its headquarters, to create and access technology both from here and elsewhere, so that they can create a new galactic empire with themselves as the head and the Earth as the headquarters, and fan out into the known universe and other universes. And that is the ultimate goal of the Illuminati. That's why they have created the particle beam accelerators at CERN and Fermi Labs, and building a third one soon in Japan, which is actually surprising to me. And of course, the cover story for these things is that they're looking for the God particle. But everything is a God particle. Everything that exists is a God particle. That's just a cover story. They're trying to collapse other parallel universes into this one, where the Illuminati and the control systems have been successful in their agenda. And so we are seeing a lot of anomalies in time and space because of this. But I will say that whether you consider it fortunate or not, there's yet another group which is based in the Kuiper Belt, which considers the Earth to be the Iraq of the galaxy and needs to be liberated, whether we like it or not. And they are sabotaging this, not because they're love, light, and peace, and not because they like humanity, but because they consider it to be a threat to them. So there's a lot of factions within factions within factions that are out there. It's a very complicated situation, and humanity is caught in the middle of all of it.
Go into detail. That's a great opening paragraph.
Well, a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, NASA reported strange objects in the Kuiper Belt. And the Kuiper Belt is a region of space that surrounds our solar system, kind of like an envelope of small little objects and energies. And they would report one day, 2 days later another one, and it started to become very suspicious. And then they stopped reporting on this. Then we saw these objects coming out of the sun, these huge objects that were even reported by NASA, and they would make their way towards the Kuiper Belt. This was also very suspicious to the news media and to the public. And so in order to distract from that, they decided to say that Pluto is also a Kuiper Belt object, and therefore there's nothing to be concerned about because we've seen this all along. And then they declassified Pluto. It's no longer a planet. Then it became a mini planet, and it became a Kuiper Belt object. And to this day, we don't know what they consider Pluto to be anymore. But these objects, these vehicles, are amassing in the solar system, and they are sabotaging the Illuminati and CERN and all the other projects that the Illuminati have. You may recall a few years ago that NASA sent 2 vehicles to the moon, and they were going to bomb the moon. The idea was to see if there was water that would come up from the moon. Well, the moon is an artificial object to begin with. And so they sent this vehicle that had the bomb and another one with a camera to follow it, and you could watch it online or 24/7, yes? And then as soon as it got to the moon and they were about to bomb the moon, guess what? There was a technical difficulty and the camera went out, and it didn't come back on until after it was all over. And that was actually the destruction of a Kuiper Belt monitoring device that was on the moon that they tried to destroy. And it gets to be a little bit complicated there.
Explain the complexities of this.
The complexities are that there are other factions on the Earth that are actually in alignment with the Kuiper Belt beings. For example, from 1938 to 1944, the Third Reich built the Paradise for the Führer in Antarctica, and they called it Base 211 or New Berlin. And they sent many people, Aryan-looking people from Germany, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Scandinavia, any occupied nation, and they sent them down to Antarctica and never seen again. It's interesting that this area, which is located in the Norwegian section of Antarctica, Queen Maud Land, yes, the Germans call Neuschwabenland, and when you Google Earth this area, it's fuzzed out. You can't see it. They shade it out so you can't understand what's going on.
That's where Admiral Byrd's...
It was actually Admiral Byrd was in the actual South Pole itself. This is a little further north towards the coast of Antarctica. But yes, even Admiral Byrd in 1947 or 46, when he went down there, said he met with these very tall Aryan-looking people who said, "Get out of here! You don't belong down here." And also 1946 to 1947 was Project High Jump, where the U.S. and Canada and Britain sent warships. Sabotage.
I wonder if that's secret code.
Yes, it is.
Don't hold back when you mention certain groups. If you wish to say them.
Yeah. So they sent this project down there it's for a war purpose, and over 50 American military people were killed. They could not fight against whatever technology was down there, and then they returned after 8 or 9 months. Now I went to Antarctica in 2010, and I visited several bases from Argentina, Chile, Ukraine, British base down there. And what was interesting on the British base, there was this big plaque outside the base that said it was built to monitor the enemy. So I said, what enemies? Or perhaps there are penguin terrorists or walruses that are you know, a danger to society. But of course,
Pelicans.
pelicans perhaps. Well, there was actually more penguins and seals. Actually, walruses are at the North Pole. So that was an interesting observation to see there. I visited the Ukrainian base and asked for a tour. And they showed me the bathrooms and the bedrooms and their this most southern bar on the earth, but they would not show me any of the technological
French
equipment
and
they had.
Italians lost a base down there, Concordia base.
Yes, from what I understand, there's still no French or Italian base anymore. And the Russian base in Lake Vostok, as you know, had very mysterious anomalies where there was radiation and ELF rising up from underneath the frozen lake. And in fact, Lake Vostok underneath the ice went up 65 degrees anomalously. A couple of years ago, the Russians were drilling to see what was down there. And then it was reported even on CNN and BBC that the team disappeared. The Russian team was gone, and there was no communication or contact. But if you went on Russian news, you found out that yes, indeed, after several days they were in communication, and they reported that underneath the ice they found a gigantic swastika flag under the ice. And so, to get back to the first part of what I was saying, the Fourth Reich is in league with these beings in the Kuiper Belt to create disruptment and sabotage to the Illuminati plans. Again, not for the purpose of uplifting and helping humanity, but for their own agenda of control and manipulation. And so it's my understanding that once they are successful in the elimination of the Illuminati, the Kuiper Belt beings will allow the Fourth Reich to administer the Earth for them and incorporate it into a different galactic network. Back in the late 1960s, the US government was in contact with a certain alien group who called themselves the Network. They claimed that they were a group of 17,000 planets, both in this galaxy and the nearby Andromeda galaxy, and that their leaders were not even from this physical universe. They were from another universe. And they were asked why were they here, and their answer was that our planet is in their jurisdiction, in their territory, and so they have every right to be here to monitor what we're doing and what's going on.
Sounds like the Federation in Star Trek.
Yes, except there's no prime directive. They are basically here to control and manipulate.
Are there any, one of the people I've interviewed, a guy called Chris Thomas, described a group which was held out of the, they couldn't get into our solar system, i.e. in the Kuiper Belt. And he called them Balon. And they had some individuals here that were working to get that in, and the various accelerators, as you mentioned earlier, was a way of breaking down the solar system's natural defenses so they could get in.
Right.
But there's only, I think, 2 places they could do that, the sun and, well, anyway, I don't want to go into details.
Well, actually, and I talk about this in my simultaneous existence seminar, a black hole in one universe is an entry point. It's an entry of a vortex, which the exit point is a star. So all stars, including our sun, are exit points of black holes in alternate universes or parallel universes. And vice versa, black holes in our universe will go into stars in other universes, and that is the natural vortex. It's the natural way the multiverse, as they now call it, shares energy, breathes in and out, if you will, and that's how energy is maintained and balanced throughout of creation. And so that is how many of these beings enter into our solar system and galaxy, is through these star portals, because that's what stars are. And I will tell you that the reason it's such a concern is because when we do nuclear experiments, when we have pollution, etc., it not only affects our world, but goes interdimensionally and affects parallel universes as well. So that is why they consider it to be important to stop what's going on here.
That fits with what I was told yesterday by Peter Pageant, how that the Bentwaters incident here all the nuclear weapons were neutralized. And the same thing happened in the Russian weapons system at the same time because of this fact that these nuclear.
But you see, the misconception is by New Agers and certain researchers is that because these aliens are stopping these nuclear weapons, they're trying to help the Earth, and that's not the reason. They're trying to protect themselves from what we may gain. Now, I have to also say that there are civilizations or groups that don't care about that, that they are in league with certain governments on this planet in order to make a totalitarian dictatorship. When people talk about an alien agenda, there are many alien agendas. It depends on the groups. They don't work all together. In fact, very few of them work together. And so we have agendas that are for control and manipulation. Some are for colonization. Some are for using humans for experiments or to be placed in zoos. Some you want humans for food. You see, so there's many different agendas, and that's why it's so complicated.
What can we do to find out about this? What can we positively do to educate ourselves about it?
To educate humanity is a task, because quite frankly, most people on this planet are so involved in their daily lives, paying their mortgages, keeping their jobs, having food, etc. Most people don't care what's going on outside their front door. Most people don't care who their leaders are as long as they have their cigarettes and their beer and everything else that they want to entertain themselves with. And that's the sad part about humanity. And so in the work that I do is I tell people what I know. They can accept it or reject it. That's their business. But at least I know that I'm telling them the truth and they can do with it what they want. I feel an obligation to do this because, number one, of my family background. You know, my great uncle Yakov Swerdlow killed over 1 million people in the Soviet Union. And my other uncle created the mind control that affected millions and millions, tens of millions. And so I feel an obligation to do something about this. I myself, at the Montauk Project, was involved in experimentations and projects that were not helpful to other people. So when I was being deprogrammed and developed deprogramming techniques for myself and that I teach others, I felt a need to share this so that people will not go through what I went through. I don't want my children and my grandchildren to go through that.
Could you go into the Montauk Project? We've heard of Cameron and
Duncan Cameron and all these people. Yes, yes, and it was, people think of Montauk Project only about time travel, but that was not the original purpose of it. Montauk Project initially was about mind control and programming, genetic manipulation, esoteric weaponry, weather manipulation, and then it went into alien and even Atlantean technology, and then going into time travel and deep space travel. So it was many, many different projects under one umbrella. And the time travel was actually towards the end of the whole thing.
That's where we have this link about the stuff that we know in the public domain is there's a big radar antenna, a SAGE radar antenna.
Yes,
it's
yes.
an abandoned base. There is, it was located near some kind of pyramid energy stuff.
Montauk Base actually was built, or they started building it in 1799. George Washington created a lighthouse and a small underground area for supplies to protect the continental United States in case of British invasion. And of course, then over the decades and centuries, it was expanded and expanded. And then they finally, at one point in the 20th century, broke into an area that looked like the top of a pyramid. Now, if you look at pictures of the beaches of Montauk from the early 1900s, you will see people standing and taking photographs next to these looks like the top of a pyramid. And of course, everyone thought that the Indians in the area built it a long time ago. And then in the Great Hurricane of 1938, the rest of these pyramids tops were buried in the sand, and you don't see them anymore. But during World War II...
You mentioned plural. How many pyramids?
There were about 2 or 3 that were sticking up, even as late as the early 1900s, and then by the 1938 they were buried up already.
George Washington, being a good old mason, he You must have selected that area because you knew something about it.
Well, interestingly, the Montauk Indians call their leader Pharaoh, just like the ancient Egyptians. And in fact, in parts of Long Island and other places in North America, there are ancient Egyptian artifacts which indicate that they were there thousands of years before everybody else thinks anyone came.
This is the pre-disaster, pre-high civilization that existed here that was built all that stuff, or who built it?
Well, the pyramid that they broke into as they were expanding the base, they determined was Atlantean. And actually, Montauk Point is the top of a mountain range or an archipelago that extends into the Atlantic Ocean and leads towards what Atlantis was or where it was. And they did find technology inside this pyramid and incorporated that into the base at Montauk. And there were 9 levels of base underneath the ground. And yes, the base was built with SAGE radar, which became obsolete in the 1960s, to protect against Soviet invasion of the east coast of the United States. And so when it became obsolete, the base was going to be designated as derelict. But because it was in an isolated area, surrounded on 3 sides by water, there's only one road to get in from the west. And so people only lived there in the summertime because the winter was kind of bleak and nobody went there. So it was very easy to create experimentation that nobody would see.
What sort of experimentation?
Well, what I was involved in, as I mentioned, was the genetic manipulation. They did not only mind control experimentation, but also sexual magic ritual, which was that's partly how they fractured the minds of children and adults. They would start out with people they considered to be expendable. Nobody would miss them. Children of drug addicts, children who were in foster care, orphans, etc. And then they found out through the German experiments, or I should say the scientists that were brought from the Nazi experimentation, that a certain type of genetics was usable, or more usable, desirable, for the input of mind control.
What type of genetics?
Those that were considered to be Celtic, Germanic, and even Slavic. Basically, those who had lighter hair, lighter eyes, have an enzyme configuration in their genetics that enables the downloading of programming software to a greater extent. People who had darker eyes, darker hair, darker skin did not have that capability and were considered to be more uncontrollable. And that's why you see the Illuminati trying to eliminate native peoples in Africa, South America, Asia, those who are considered undesirable, until they came up with a very bright idea in the late 70s that they could try to manipulate that as well. And so Michael Jackson actually was a prototype of taking a darker skinned person, changing their characteristics so that they could be more downloadable. And that's why over the decades, he went from being black to white, male to female, human to alien. He didn't know what he was.
What do you mean changing? What were they doing?
Well, they were programming him to change his features and characteristics so that he would be more conducive to programming, and then they could use that function, or I should say that recipe, to extrapolate that into other populations that were considered unprogrammable. But unfortunately for him, he became overloaded, and that is a problem with the programming, because when they get something that's really usable, they really use it, and they put in as much as they possibly can until it overloads, just like if you put too much software in a computer, it shuts down. And he shut down, and he needed drugs and medications in order to function, and then he became a liability. And when a programming icon becomes a liability, they eliminate them.
John Lennon as well?
John Lennon, many people, Michael Jackson, there have been so many over the years.
But why do they use a public icon like that? Are they trying to somehow transmit this to the general public?
Yes, when they take what we call a programming icon that have very specific softwares running, and they put them before a camera, or they have music that's on the radio or in a movie, what have you, those who are programmed to follow that icon will do the same. They will do the same functions. Look at what happened when Britney Spears shaved her head. Next day, thousands of people around the world shaved their head. They didn't know why, but they did it because their icon did it, so they had to do it. So it was a very successful program. Yeah, but you know, what they did was, in Montauk, when they would torture a child or an adult, whatever they were using at that time, the room was surrounded by devices that absorbed the energy. What they learned is when a child especially, because children have this greater energy of fear when they're traumatized, and if they execute a child at that moment of heightened fear, the pineal gland produces a drug called adrenochrome. And if they extract that adrenochrome, it becomes a very powerful chemical that can be used for programming and for sexual magic ritual or any other ritual that the Illuminati want to participate in. Also, the energy or the components of the atomic structure of this adrenochrome can be downloaded into a software that can be then enhanced, boosted, transmitted to satellites, and then radiated down through scalar waves to a particular person, place, or thing, or to genetic groups, or to entire countries. And that's how they also are able to enhance their control systems.
So this would explain our telecommunication systems and what's involved in the communication systems.
Yes. You know, in 1988, President Reagan was very happy to announce that the entire planet was ringed by satellites so that there was no place on Earth that would be considered remote anymore. But what he didn't say to complete the statement was that every place was now controllable. All mind control could be transmitted to anywhere on the Earth, no matter how isolated it was. And so when people think, you know, and they tell me, well, I'm going to move to New Zealand, I'm going to move to Ecuador because I get out of the control system. No. It's a new world order. It's a global order. It doesn't matter what country you go to, where you think you're going to hide. The transmissions are there.
Now that means a very system, which it's naive to think there's a couple of people in a base somewhere looking at a screen, clicking a mouse to say that implies an artificial intelligence.
Correct. You know, there's no one listening in for every single person out there. Of course, that would take quite a lot of manpower. What they do is that's why they want people to have cell phones and computers and even the electrical system in their house, which people have to realize is also part of the control system. So when you are on the phone or you're on a computer and you say something and you type a certain word, you say a certain thing, it registers and goes into a system which a computer reads out. If there's a consistent pattern of an issue, then it may go to a person to review, to determine if a contra program or a program that fixes these problems should be transmitted to that particular person. So there's a few levels before a person actually looks at an issue. Otherwise, it's just a general transmission to humanity. Now, the entire planet is programmed. 100% of the population has some sort of programming, but there is about 5 to 8% at this point who are specifically programmed. And that means they have many deep layers of programming for specific functions in the global agendas that will be perpetrated upon the Earth shortly and already have been. One, for example, which is in process is the financial collapse, which is in process right now, imminently, so that they can replace the currency with a global currency and a credit system. The next big thing will be the staged alien invasion, where they will have you believe through Blue Beam Project that the Earth is being attacked from elsewhere. President Reagan announced this also in the 1980s, that this may happen.
What do you call blue beam? There's many different types of blue beam.
Well, generally, Blue Beam Project is satellite transmissions through the ionosphere that show a holographic image of an object, a phase, religious figure, whatever they're going to show, so that people think something is happening in the sky. A lot of the vehicles that are seen these days are actually blue beam holographic projections.
Now, this is not actually holographic technology, it's some other kind of technology which is feelable and
Now it is. Now it is. They tested this actually in 1962 in Havana Harbor. That's how old the technology is. Actually, it's based on alien technology. And U.S. submarine surfaced not far from Havana Harbor and projected an image of the Virgin Mary over Havana Harbor, so that the communistic society would become religious again and get rid of their leaders. That was just a test. Now you're correct. Blue beam is so sophisticated, they can project a holographic image that can actually be picked up on radar, produce a sound, and you would even be able to touch it.
In these closing stages, what exactly do you want to get across to people, not necessarily in this country? What's your bottom line on the mind control and other, I mean, you're helping to deprogram people. What's the beef there?
It's not just for any one country. I try, my hope is all people will at least look.
You're in England now, but...
Yeah, yes, it's here in England. Well, it's one of the centers of mind control, isn't it? You have Tavistock here and other locations. But, you know, it doesn't matter the country, because ultimately they all have the same rulers behind the scenes. They don't recognize borders. And so I don't know if I can say my goal, but my hope is that people will wake up and realize that things are not the way they should be, that they need to take control of their own mind. I don't believe in physical revolution or physical violence. The war has to be in here. You have to take control of your brain, of your mind pattern, of your emotions, and do release work that will undermine the mind patterns of the programming, and then release what's hooked on to those mind patterns and access your core personality, reintegrate who and what you are, sew those compartmentalized pieces of the mind back together, so that we can have the society we're supposed to have. Why does this happen? Because, as I said before, we project out what's in our mind patterns and the world reflects it back. So humanity as a species has a victimization mind pattern. When you have a victimization mind pattern, you attract tyrants and oppressors. And so, what we see, it's really, we must take responsibility. You can't blame the Illuminati or the aliens. They are here because we're allowing them to be here. If we change the way we think, change the film, project out something else, then they will have no power over us. It could happen tomorrow if everybody would wake up and do it. Is that likely? No. Will it eventually happen? I believe so. I think that humanity will be backed against a corner to the point where they'll say, hey, we've had enough and we're going to do something about this. The Illuminati, the mind control, the programming, all of this, they want you to think that you're disconnected from the source, from the God mind. But that can never be. They can only make you have an illusion that that is so. But in actuality, you can never be disconnected from Creator. And so it's my hope to teach people how to take that part of them, the creative part, and extrapolate that into their lives and project that out, so all of this will go away.
Okay, how do people wake up?
This is what I teach in my work. I teach people how to balance the left and right hemisphere of the brain, how to work with their energy systems, how to deprogram, how to connect to their higher intelligence that's within them. I teach them color therapy, alternative healing, how to eat, how to exercise, basically how to be a human being. And so that's what I teach. And again, it's up to each individual to do this or not do this, their choice.
And how do they do that? How do they get in contact? Or, I mean, if you can't do it personally, is there any others that you get?
To be honest, I don't know what other people do. I only know what I do. I don't really go to other websites or read other people's works because I'm too busy doing what I'm doing. And of course, my wife and I have expansions.com on the internet, and we do our seminars, webinars. We teach all kinds of classes. We have a blog. I encourage people to take a look and see what they think.
Okay, there's 5 things that you want to get across. Do you want to just...
5 things to get across. Well,
or we could make it around half dozen if you want.
Well,
or just one thing.
You know, and they're not in any order of importance. It's just what comes to mind. And that the first thing is that, and I tell this in all my classes, that there's nothing to fear. You are always loved. You can do nothing wrong. And when I say that, it's not that you should murder people. It's that whatever does happen, there's a reason for it and a lesson to learn from it. And that you must take control of your own mind so no one else takes control of your mind. And research who and what you are. What are your origins? Where did your family come from? And I encourage you to go to the sources, not to read in books or on the internet, but go to where you originated and go from that source back, because that's where the information is. And to be kind to each other. You must be kind to each other. Get rid of the anger. Get rid of the hostility. There's no reason to fight. Now is the time to unify, but for the right reasons.
Why now? What's happening now?
Right now, we are in the very critical point of the entire collapse of society as we know it. It will start with the collapse of the economy. The Illuminati are creating artificially events that they will correlate to the book of Revelation so that they can prove the validity of the Bible. And that's why we see every week discoveries in the Middle East and in Europe and other places that verify certain chapters in the Bible. We've even seen a Hebrew University in Jerusalem verifying the Shroud of Turin being 2,000 years old. And so that will establish the second coming of Christ, who will be a cloned being whose genetics will match the blood on the shroud. Now, before that happens, as I mentioned, will be the staged alien invasion. We will not see the so-called invading species, but a savior race will come to chase them away, and that will be presented as the reptilians who saved us. And they will announce that they are our true ancestors. They're the mommy and daddy of human beings. And then they will bring in the staged second coming, who will announce the New World Order as his new holy empire. And when they match the genetics to the shroud, who's going to say it's not him? And so as George Bush said after 9/11, either you're with me or you're against me. So there will be a dichotomy of those who will accept and those who will not accept. And my hope is to avoid getting to that point, because there will be a lot of worse things before it gets better. But should all of this happen in the way that it's planned, ultimately those beings in the Kuiper Belt that I mentioned will make their own move. And the Illuminati are afraid of them because their purpose is to get rid of them. But again, there's no love, light, and peace in the Kuiper Belt either. It's just another control system with another agenda. And so that's why humanity has to open up their minds and take control and realize what's going on and do something about it within themselves first, and then project that out.
So that is not to have fear, not to have violence.
No fear. Know that who created you, the God mind as I call it, it has a love for everything that it created. And so if we realize that, you can never be alone. Everything you need is already within you. You just have to express that.
Well, thank you very much, Stewart.
I appreciate it very much, Miles. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Excellent.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Excellent. It was brilliant.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
Excellent.
Great.
No.
Positive. I'm very concerned about